Plattsburgh is gearing up for its Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration, which is back this September after COVID moved most everything online last year. The parade with marching bands will return on Saturday, September 11th, along with reenactments and history talks. There will be the traditional wreath-laying ceremonies on Crab Island and in Riverside Cemetery, where American and British soldiers and sailors are buried side by side. You can see a full schedule of events for this year's Battle of Plattsburgh on the 1814 Commemoration Inc. website or on our website at mountainlake.org. The Graveside Memorial at Riverside Cemetery traditionally kicks off the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration each year, and we are pleased to be joined by retired Army Colonel David Fitz-Enz, who will host the ceremony this year on Thursday, September 9th. Colonel Fitz-Enz, it is always a pleasure to have you. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
If folks have never attended the Riverside Cemetery and that ceremony, why is it significant?
Well, it's significant because of who's buried there. The commander of the British fleet is buried there. Captain Downey, or actually Lieutenant Downey as they were in those days. And his sister put that sarcophagus in there a number of years later. And they clustered around that grave, those who had died in the battle on all sides. So there are British, there are Canadians buried there, as well as Americans. And a lot of the graves have been lost over the years, so we only have the headstones for a dozen or more. But the ground is really sacred, and it's hard to find a place in the United States where you find foreigners who fought against us in this country who remain under our care.
You have done years of research into the Battle of Plattsburgh, writing the book and producing the documentary for PBS called The Final Invasion, that, by the way, is going to be broadcast here on Mountain Lake PBS on September 4th at 7 p.m. Is that book and documentary still to this day the most extensive, most definitive account of the Battle of Plattsburgh during the War of 1812?
It really is. Before the book that I was fortunate enough to write, there never was a book written about the battle itself. There were snippets here and there, but no one ever thought of it as being significant. But if you read the history of the English-speaking people that was written by Churchill, he addresses the Battle of Plattsburgh in that great volume. And he says that it was the most decisive battle of the War of 1812. And you think of Baltimore, you think of the White House being burned and so forth. Those were diversions so that a force of 15,000 British came down to take Plattsburgh and then Lake Champlain.
Those 15,000 troops, the largest foreign military invasion ever into the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And when you think that the United States, when the war began, only had 1,000 regular Army soldiers, and Congress passed a bill to establish an army of 10,000 for the whole country. And here we are with 15,000 enemy attacking up here. We're so overwhelmed. This should have been blown away by the British.
Outnumbered, outgunned, yet they held the British.
They did.
And sent them in retreat back to Canada. Was that really one of the final acts of the war?
It really was. It was the most decisive act because the British ran out of time. You only fight in the summertime in these wars, and they were running out of summertime, and so they retreated back. And I think General Prevost, because I have his diary that was written by his daughter during the battle, and he talks about the disappointment, but we're going to fight again. In other words, he's going to regroup and come back in spring. But of course, by spring, the entire war is over.
You enjoy now hosting and presiding over the ceremonies here. Why?
Yes.
Why is it important for people to come in and learn about this chapter of our history?
Well, you should take a look at one of the books that I wrote, Redcoat's Revenge, which is a novel that tells you what would happen if you lost at Plattsburgh. What would take place if they had swept through here, as they should have, and gone all the way down and wintered at Whitehall, which was what their intention was. And then they intended to negotiate the end. They didn't want to take America back. What they wanted was to extend Canada. And they wanted to extend it further south so that all of the Great Lakes would eventually be within Canada. And to do that, they wanted a new border, and the border was going to be the 43rd parallel instead of, as it is today, the 45th parallel. That's the northern border of Massachusetts. So if you take that line and you draw it west, that takes Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin out of the United States and makes them permanently Canada. That's what their objective. That's why this battle is so important. What would happen to this country? If you lived here today under those circumstances, you'd be speaking with a British accent.
And you talked about the books that you've written. You're a 30-year Army veteran. When you retired, you put all those years of military experience and expertise into a new career as an author and as a producer. And your first book, Why a Soldier, was a memoir about your time as a combat photographer in Vietnam.
I love history so much, and I read about it, but I never was a part of it. And I thought, well, it really was. I'm a witness to history, because I was a platoon leader of the first platoon of combat photographers to go into Vietnam. My mission was document the war. We produced 20,000 motion picture feet of film a month and 20,000 black and white photographs as well, and they all are in the National Archive today. So I thought, well, I'm a witness to history, and a memoir is a witness. And so I decided to write the memoir.
And this past spring, you have written a new novel, a spy novel.
Yes. Sitting there one day looking out, eating my lunch at the bridge, which is only 100 yards away, and it's a railway bridge for the underground. And there's a walkway on the side for maintenance. And I thought, gee, that's a great place for spies, because I could have my spy living on one side, and I could have my radio operators living on the other side of the Thames. There's two separate communities. And they could meet on the bridge at night. The radio operator whose house I had put directly under the bridge, because there actually is a house directly under the bridge, and I could have him reach out of his attic and connect his antenna to the bridge, and then he could transmit an omnidirectional antenna like that, and the British would never be able to find it. So that was the gist of how to write a spy novel.
Not to give much of the plot away, but it is about a soldier who comes home from war,
yes,
returns home, and discovers a dark family secret that a couple of his relatives were in fact German spies.
Right.
And that's the basis for the
And
novel.
it's a woman spy and her son. I'll tell you that much. In the book, the reader will go to France, of course, in the trenches, go to a chateau in France that was a hospital during the war. We go to Sweden. We go to Rome,
so you include actual places and real events, which make it all the more realistic.
Exactly. So we actually walk the ground in all those places, so that when I give you a street name, that's the real street name. And in fact, and of course, all over London, and places like pumping stations and pubs and restaurants and bridges and so forth, you can take our book with you and walk London and read the accounts, because we actually walk that ground. So it's kind of makes it more interesting